Start the recording. There we go. Okay, so if you go to this this site, it should provide access to a set of materials, which will look something like, and I'll do it over here. So it'll go and it will redirect you to something that looks like this, and the exact details will be different, but it's going to provide a set of folders on Google Docs. I'm going to put this back up in case anyone didn't get it. Anyone need this up here for a bit longer? Yeah, one or two people? Okay. Thank you. That's great. Good. Okay. Are you all set with that? A Winchell? Maybe you could help Roberto here. Right here. Everyone else see the site there? Okay, anyone need Winchell's help? Okay. Okay, so if you do have access to that, you will find a set of resources, and I'd like to walk you through very briefly what's in these resources. So there'll be materials here which are geared at people with different interests. Perhaps the most basic of them is a schedule here. And I emphasize it's a draft schedule. It will be evolving in response to expressed interest, pace, etc. There's also going to be some background material in this background and other references that will provide links to information about the course resources, some reference articles, etc. Beyond that, we're going to have a repository of models built in class. These are going to be models we're building together, and I'm going to put models that I build all throughout the day into that folder, models built in class, so that if any of you encounter problems, you're having difficulties reproducing what I'm doing on my screen, on yours, and you want to just get the latest version of that model that we've created, I'll be posting it there many times in the day, okay? So models built in class right now is going to start with essentially no contents of relevance, and then we'll be adding materials to that. A further resource that we're going to be using in a big way is AnyLogic 7 examples. This is dozens and dozens of models in the health domain that we have crafted to support events like this. And they run the gamut from models involving environmental epidemiology to chronic disease to communicable disease, aspects of maternal child health, components of modeling focused around service delivery, a wide range of different topics. And you'll find AnyLogic 7 examples to provide a lot of examples of how you build things as well as what can be built. Beyond that, for those who are interested in following some of the slides that I'll be posting, over time I'll be adding to this lecture slides area, okay? Lecture slides is going to contain an evolving set of materials that I presented as slides or slides to support that, what I've made comments verbally. Beyond that, for those interested in going deeper, challenge problems, step-by-step tutorials, and references for hands-on assistance are designed to help students who are interested in pursuing work on their own go further. So there's kind of some sort of crib sheets and references for hands-on assistance that guide you as to commonly need tasks. Step-by-step tutorials provide click-by-click guidance on building up certain models, and challenge problems are more open-ended problems to challenge your understanding. So you might try those when you feel you have a pretty good grasp of the issues and you want to grapple with a slightly more textured problem with recourse to a solution, for that to compare your own results to. Okay, so this material will be evolving. We'll be adding things here over time. but I want to make sure that you can easily access it and get back to it frequently. Okay? Many students do find it useful to follow the models built in class. Okay? Okay, so some initial topics here. What we're going to do right now is we're going to go into one of these folders, namely any Logic 7 examples here. Okay? And if you go into any Logic 7 examples, you will find a wide variety of particular models that are organized in folders. That's what this little thing is with a kind of a torso and head atop it. So ladies and gentlemen, there should be one of them that's visible for GIS and food environment, okay? If it's not at the top, you might want to go click on this last modified area so that you can sort it by modification date. Alternatively, you could sort it by name here, and you could go down and find. It should be called GIS and Food Environment version 4. Chances are it may be at the top for yours if you're sorting by last modified date. In any case, each of these will be a sort of model that you can explore. For this one, I'd like you to go into that folder. And what you will see now is a single file that lives within that folder. Okay? Now this file is going to be a any logic file that will be running, will be loading and running. And it has the extension ALP. Okay? We're going to download this file. Now, the reason I'm going into this in such detail is because occasionally students run afoul of one issue or another, and we want to know about those issues as soon as possible, but also to head off some issues. So if you go click on this thing here, you will see something that is somewhat unpleasant. Okay? You will see something that is puzzling. You will see something that for some people is downright distressing. Okay, and in order to get around this, you will find in the upper right corner of your screen should be something that says download. Okay? You don't have to worry about what's here. This is secretly what any logic files look like behind the scenes. And for those for whom this is a meaningful statement, this is information that's encoded in using a technique called XML encoding. It's a so-called markup language, a bit like the language that we use to create web pages. But we're not going to be looking at that through the boot camp other than as a way to download. So you're going to press this download button, and that will bring that file down to your computer, okay? Going to your computer, it should be placed in your downloads folder, okay? And you don't have to bother yourself with anything more than that. So if you want, you could go back there. Another thing that you could do, if you want to do it more quickly, is you could right-click and do download. I think on Macs it's, I don't know, option click, or I'm not sure. Winchell can speak from a Mac perspective. Winchell, when you want to do the equivalent of right-click, what do you do on a Mac?
Depends on your setting. You can use option left click equals to right-click, or you can just directly right-click.
You can, okay, so you can learn something every day. You can right-click. Okay, that's good. But you'll want to download it so that it's on your machine. Who needs help with this? Because there'll be many times you're going to want to do this during the boot camp. You just want to make sure these basic skills are in place. Okay? Do people have this on your machines now? Okay, great. So the next step then will be to go and open this file on your machines. Now, again, there's many ways to skin that cat, but I'm going to call up AnyLogic first, and I'll go through this with you just so that we enjoy a similar experience of discovery. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to go and I'm going to call up AnyLogic here. And AnyLogic takes a bit of time to load. It's loading in a lot of different types of information when it's coming up. And when it first comes up, many of you will see a welcome screen that that's going to have a dizzying number of different options. Okay, and I'd like to walk you through how to navigate that a little bit so that it doesn't stymie your attempt to operate with these files. So AnyLogic is software that runs an environment known as Eclipse, which is a very, very popular environment used by commercial software development agencies and institutions. So, ladies and gentlemen, when it first comes up, you'll probably see an area such as this one. The exact coloration will be different. Some of you may see it in red. Some of you may see it in blue, some in green, depending on the version of AnyLogic you're using. Do people see this sort of thing when you first come into AnyLogic? If you don't, it may be because you've explored AnyLogic a bit, which is great, and we'll get to that point. So within this area, there's a couple of features I want to draw your attention to. This is kind of the welcome screen, and you can indicate whether or not you want to go back to this every time you start AnyLogic. You'll find that if you go browse these top areas here, there's some useful components. For example, in this example models, you'll find dozens of additional models, some of which Jeff and I have contributed, but which again include models from all different types of backgrounds, in contrast to the health ones I've given you. All of ours are essentially in the health area. These are from a wide variety of areas. And there's a lot of examples which are sort of used for building understanding within AnyLogic that's quite useful. This getting started in AnyLogic, which is what showed originally, helps clue you into some resources for getting going, including some step-by-step tutorials that some of you may find helpful. And it also provides some shortcuts to the example models and model creation. But for now, we're not going to actually focus on this. We're going to go up to this upper right-hand corner and press this button that says minimize. Okay? There we go. And having minimized, we will be placed into an environment in which we'll be circulating for the rest of the week. Okay? This is an environment that's going to have certain structural features that you'll be learning about a little bit this morning, but especially starting tomorrow. It's going to orient us to projects we have open, to a palette we can use to add to those projects, to properties about things that we have selected, and some additional windows to alert us to problems, etc. For now, do you have a screen like this up? Do you see something like that? If you don't, Windchill stands ready. Okay? He's ready for deployment. Okay. Who needs Windchillian help? Okay. Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to go up to File, Open, File, Open, and depending on which computers you're using, Mac, PC, in the unlikely event someone else besides me is using Linux, you can go select. The details will differ a little bit by those computers, but you can go select the downloads folder. You can go say, point me to my downloads. On Windows, it's visible, I think, under my computer or something, and on Macs, it's visible in a way that Windchill can detail for you. Okay, downloads, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to go select the model I downloaded, which should be called GIS Food and PA Environment version 4. Do you see that? It's in your downloads folder. Okay, so who needs Windchill's help? Okay, Roberto? Okay, sector 2. Great. GIS and food environment. Do people find that in your downloads? Yeah? Okay. So here we're going to go select that, and we'll say OK. And it will then open this up for us. Okay? It will go and try to read in that stuff we saw earlier that you don't have to worry about, but which is its lifeblood. It'll read that in, and it will go and show us the model here. Okay? So here, it's read it in, and you'll see that over here on the left-hand side, there's some information about the components of the model. This projects area is showing you the pieces of the model, the constituents of the model, the building blocks out of which it is built. And these are pieces that we're going to learn how to put together. They're going to come to us from this palette, out of which we will paint beautiful tapestries. Oh, okay, mixing metaphors. Beautiful paintings. Okay, so here's the palette, and this is going to provide us the building blocks that are shown over here in projects. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, you'll also note that there's a properties window, which if you select one of these items over here in projects, changes. Okay, so if I select the model as a whole, I'll see certain properties highlighted over here on the right-hand side. And if I go and I select different components within this model, for example, if I go and click down here, I'll see different types of information. Whatever I click on, either in this projects window or in this so-called canvas, which is depicting areas of the model in more detail, I will see it selected, and I will see information about its selected properties. So properties will indicate the features, the characteristics of whatever I've selected. Okay. Now, some of you may have windows positioned in different ways. Like, is your properties window at a different location than this? Same location? Okay. Because it turns out, and I don't want you to get caught up in it, that this is a reconfigurable workspace. I'd suggest that you not do this right now, but you can drag these windows around and rearrange them as suits your pleasure. Okay, so I can actually go, for example, separate out the palette so that it's separate from projects, or put them back together. Okay. I can also, and this will be quite useful, go and take some of these and zoom in by focusing on it. And in order to see that, do you folks see Maine here? This is Maine. This is kind of the global environment. This is the overall environment. It's the stage on which the agents of which our model will be composed move around, on which they strut. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you see Maine up here, you can double-click on Maine. Okay? And it will then become a full, it will occupy the visual extent of those other windows, which might allow you to explore it, with greater focus, to focus your efforts on that. And then you can double-click on Maine again, and it will return to its place as just one star in the firmament. Okay? So Maine here is just one window which I use to, it's about a part of a model. It's about the one that's highlighted over here on the left-hand side, Maine. And by double-clicking on that tab, I can make it full screen and back. A similar principle holds for other things. If I want to zoom in on properties, I could double-click there, and now I can see properties in the entire window. Double-click on it again, and return back. Do you see that? Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, just to orient us a bit to this environment, but let's go into something more substantive than pointing and clicking on windows. It would be nice to be able to do that easily, but let's focus on something of more conceptual substance. What is this model? What sort of beast is it that stands before us? So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to go take a look a little bit more greater detail at the contents of main. And in fact, I will double click just so that this focuses our attention on this. What you'll see here is a map. And this map is a map of a city and within the Commonwealth, Melbourne. And what you'll find is that, as is shown on this map, Melbourne is recommended by many beauties and resources, and some of those are shown here highlighted. So there's stores which represent markets of various sorts at which fresh fruits and vegetables can be found. And then you'll also see in blue a pearl, almost a ring of different parks associated with it. In addition, Melbourne is encumbered by a variety of stores which offer less salubrious fare. Twinkies and Hostess donuts and various other fat and sugar saturated foods, and those are shown in these kind of these small store-like patterns here. These are convenience stores whose food options are more challenging to health. These are all laid out in an environment that is cognizant of geography, and which is linked in with routing networks of roads and other thoroughfares. And over here on the left-hand side, you'll see the name of some of these markets which have been presented down. This was a model we built in a boot camp in Melbourne a little bit over a year ago. It was in November 2015. So this model includes this environment, and this is going to be an environment which agents move around. And up here in the upper left, you'll see various outputs from the model that will be filled in when we run it. So this is an overall environment in which agents will be moving. I'd like you to go double, so you can narrow back down from this. We had a double click to focus in. And I'm going to focus back in, zoom out from that. And I'm going to go click on person here, double click on person. And this is going to depict for us a kind of theory of personhood that operates in the model. So we're going to have that environment in main in which there's going to be particular people circulating. In addition to the supermarkets and convenience stores and parks, that environment will be occupied by people. And in main, we'll see some aspects of the behavior and characteristics of a person. So if we go in here, and I'm going to double click on this to zoom in here, what we will find is that individuals within this model are associated with some characteristics, or we call them properties. They have a home at a defined location. They have some preference for foods that are obtained by convenience stores, perhaps pies or Twinkies or floaties, something along those lines. And beyond that, they have a set of information about themselves that is evolving over time. For example, how many convenience store meals they have at home in their larder, and how many supermarket meals they still have. Beyond that, we have a description of their behavior over time. Behavior not necessarily conscious, but also behaviors of a more physiologic character. For example, here they're engaged in a set of behaviors related to food seeking and food procurement, where they can be in a state of not seeking food or engaging in food seeking through access to supermarkets or convenience stores. They can engage in purchasing behavior there and then transit back to home. So this is what's called a state chart. This is a depiction of an agent's, one of these people's transition between a set of categorical states or status with respect to some concern. Here, food procurement. So at any one time, that agent, with respect to food procurement, is either in not seeking food or in a heading to supermarket or shopping for supermarket or transit to home or one of these other similar states for convenience stores. At any one time, they're in one of them, and over time, which one they're in will evolve. And you'll see there are these various icons, various kind of symbols that are used to indicate different rules governing when an agent might move from one state to the other. So there's some that look like clocks, which will denote timeouts. So after a certain amount of time is drawn from a random distribution or is set by a fixed number, they'll move to a particular state. In another case, it may take being told, okay, it's time for this agent to move based on other considerations, such as exhaustion if they're larder. In other cases, they move when they arrive at a destination. In other cases, it's a hazard rate, in a way you might be familiar with from biostatistics, a chance per unit time that they will go. So ladies and gentlemen, here we have a depiction of one aspect of their behavior related to food procurement. And there's rules that govern this that we'll be talking about quite a lot this week. Beyond that, there's some behavior associated with weight change, which is a very simple depiction, but it points to a more general pattern, where in addition to transitioning between discrete states that are categorical, where you're either in one state or another, here you are having an evolution over time that occurs according to a continuous variable. Here, weight in kilograms. And so their weight is being modified over time by energy intake, energy expenditure, and by both basal energy expenditure and physical activity-related energy expenditure. And this is a system where there's feedbacks, where as weight goes up, for example, the basal energy expenditure per day rises with that. There's a bigger body to that is expending energy. And then the weight actually also impacts the amount of energy expended via physical activity, as do other things such as the distance to parks, etc. Their energy intake, in turn, will end up being affected by what food they're eating. And their choice of what food to eat is indicated with yet another form here. So this is what's called a system dynamics model. It's the model up here with weight in kilograms. We have a state for that person with respect to a concern, or multiple aspects of that state evolving over time in a continuous fashion. It rises and falls in a continuous way. So we might also use that, for example, to track income over time. It's a conceptually continuous variable. We might use it to track aspects of someone's immune memory with respect to pertussis, a disease where the immune memory decays over time. We might be interested in characterizing at a continuous level someone's even blood sugar level or someone's degree of physical fitness. These would all be factors we might characterize in a continuous fashion, in a fashion that rises and falls over time based on feedbacks and based on additional factors that shape it about the environment or other components. So this is a system dynamics model. Over here, where you see what's called an action chart. And this action chart has to do with characterizing what happens when someone goes to eat a meal, as happens 3 times a day. So there's this event that goes off that said it's time to eat. And when that person goes to eat, they need to choose what types of food they will consume. And here that decision is made according to their preferences as well as to what's in the fridge. Okay, they will be consuming food, and if food is exhausted, they're seeking food and they don't have it handy, they may further go shopping and obtain food. Very simple model. Stylized model, one suitable for building in a boot camp, but it captures the fact that models describe for a given agent some properties of that agent, some actions the agent can undertake, such as going going shopping, some rules under which those actions occur. They can be subject, ladies and gentlemen, to certain interventions from an external perspective that might change, for example, the location of supermarkets. They are further associated with aspects of state, a certain situation for themselves that evolves over time, a status that they have that will change over time. And we may characterize the processes that change that status over time using one or more different ways of specifying them. As state charts among continuous categories, as stock and flow diagrams of system dynamics in terms of continuous categories, as sort of decision rules, additionally, that we may choose, this is how they behave now, this is a different way they behave later, that may be chosen according to certain sort of logical rules and almost an algorithm that plays out. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have here a model where we have an overall environment that we saw before. We can go click on main here. This is the environment in which these agents move around. Each of those agents is exposed to aspects of those environments and evolves over time according to a set of processes, admittedly very stylized here, that are shown here. So each of these agents has a certain state right now, and that state evolves over time based on their own situation, but also based on the environment around them. For example, the distance to the nearest supermarket or convenience store, the availability of parks that end up shaping their physical activity level is changing their state over time. It's a dynamic model, we use the term. It's a model that's a simulation model, but to distinguish it from statistical simulation, where another approach I use a great deal, where we are characterizing successive draws, we sample from a posterior distribution or what have you. Here, we're having dynamic simulation. It's simulation of behavior over time. Okay? Now, this model that we've seen thus far is a model. It depicts a sort of in a stylized fashion, a simplified fashion, a sort of a mimic of some processes we hypothesize to hold in the world. And by changing those hypotheses, we can sharpen our thinking about what might explain patterns we see in the world. I'm going to double click again on this to zoom out, because a model like this offers advantages that are quite limited unless they're paired with a very important feature, a feature called simulation. A feature that takes that model that we have and uses it to say, okay, so if that's your theory about the world, if that's your working hypothesis about how things might be working in the world, what does that imply about behavior over time? And this is what this simulation package, AnyLogic, excels at. So having depicted this kind of set of rules by which an agent might evolve, we can go and simulate that population. So we can go, for example, and right-click on this area called simulation down here, which is so-called simulation experiment. And we will choose run from that menu, okay? This is one of several ways you can run models in AnyLogic, okay? So I will show that again in case any of you didn't catch that. Over here within the model, we see a depiction of the model components, and then down here in blue are successive what are called experiments, simulations that depict scenarios for the model. We can right-click on one of them and choose Run to run that particular scenario. So using particular assumptions, I'd like to run that model out and say, what's the consequence of that theory we've just seen depicted? If that's how people behave, according to these sort of rules that are depicted here, what's the implication of behavior over time that we might expect to see for a given individual, or indeed for the model as a whole? Okay? Now, here, what we're going to see is a depiction where we're going to have individuals who are placed, those are those people we saw in the model, Those people are going to be placed in a home initially, and then they are going to engage in food-seeking behavior. Okay? So here, an individual is depicted using a kind of a bowling pin shape. So they're depicted with the shape. They have a head and they have a torso. And the shape of the said torso will be evolving over time according to their weight. Okay? Here we see these individuals moving around. Do you see little things moving? Those individuals, if you were to go study the network, or if we were to go slow this down, perhaps by clicking up here in order to slow down the movements to run it, say, at 1/10 speed, you will actually find that individuals are moving according to streets, perhaps streets that many of you know very well. And here we will see that as people move, that the street grid is in fact being followed. I'm going to go click on this little icon here to do view so that I can zoom in a little bit more to the pleasant environs of Melbourne. Here we go, and you will see movements along some of these thoroughfares. So this individual seems to have a particular predilection for eating at a convenience store. Perhaps they offer a type of screaming yellow zonkers that they enjoy eating, and so they travel to that convenience store quite a bit. It's the closest convenience store to them, but it involves a fair distance of routing. So they perhaps live a bachelor's existence and subsist on these floating yellow zonkers. You'll see others who visit these stores here, these food stores that are larger, which in fact represent supermarkets, which have a greater variety of fare. Each of these individuals, if we go and we click on this area here, we can navigate down to the level of the population. You'll have to scroll down a bit. It's a bit of a slog, but you'll find an area called population. Do you see that? Do you see this menu here? This allows us to navigate through the model as it's running to drill down to see what's going on at different levels. And we're going to click on population. And here's an individual whose status is evolving over time. It's evolving according to these rules. It's evolving according to these processes that we've characterized as governing the behavior of a person. Here, their weight, for example. This is an individual with a weight of 92 kilograms. By the look of it, that weight is rising. And here you'll see their weight changing over time as a trajectory. So this individual has risen in the running time of this model. Their weight has risen from 75 kilograms to somewhere north of 90, and it has actually evolved over time a little bit as their exposure to food in their larder has changed. And they may have visited a supermarket, got some more healthy food. It affected their weight to bring it down a bit, but then it's rising again now. And the weight is changing. You'll also notice over here they're in a certain state. So they're not in a food-seeking state right now. Over here they have no food remaining, but they're going to now go shopping. They just went shopping at a convenience store, that replenished their larder, consumed the food, and this is an individual who's now again in a non-seeking food-seeking state. This individual is encumbered by a high predilection, a high preference for convenience store food. This is an individual who is partaking very strongly of convenience stores, and for most of their meals they are going to the convenience store. By contrast, if we go up here and we look among other agents, we can move to other agents up here, and we will see that some individuals have actually a greater preference for food from a supermarket. And what that means is they will weigh the distance to a supermarket with the distance to a convenience store and go a longer distance to a supermarket on average than than they would be willing to place for to secure a meal at a convenience store. So here we can capture preferences. And for a given individual, we could change those preferences. For example, by clicking on this assumption for a person, we could go edit it here, and we can say the preference for convenience store meals is very low, say 0.1. And this individual from thence on will be governed by a greater preference for supermarket meals. Okay, they'd be willing to go a longer distance to go to a supermarket compared to a convenience store. So here, ladies and gentlemen, we have a depiction over time of an individual evolving. This is not something we could do easily in our head. Many studies have shown that it's very difficult for people to consistently think through the consequence of dynamic hypotheses, of hypotheses that involve reasoning at a quantitative level about the interaction of a variety of factors. Studies have revealed that people really fall short when it comes to this sort of reasoning. They have a difficult time reasoning it through in their head. A model like this provides us a way of taking a theory out of our head, putting it into a form that is more precise, that can be shared with others, that can be described in a more fulsome fashion, and that can be checked against empirical evidence by running it and comparing if the results of what we see here are consistent with what we see in empirical data. I'd like to reflect on that. I'd like to leave this level of an individual and go up to this level of the population as a whole and remind people that if we scroll up here, and you can do so using a right click and dragging here, you should be able to see some graphs up above this area. Up above the area of the map, there should be a series of charts or series of figures that have put together. Now, these figures summarize information across the population regarding certain patterns. Do you see this? Do you see some charts here up above the level? Who needs Winchillian help? Okay, I think there's three people needing help here. Actually, yeah, if you might be able to help out, Ante, that's great. Okay, so, okay. So anyone want to ask a question about that you think might carry over to others about what I've done thus far? Okay. So ladies and gentlemen, these charts depict relationships, associations within the model. So this chart just above the map depicts a given individual is shown as a dot here. It's a scatter plot. On the x-axis is showing for that individual what fraction of their meals are eaten at convenience stores. On the y-axis here, we see something about weight. And that's the weight of that individual. So the placement of a dot representing a particular individual at a certain location indicates that individual as the fraction of meals they've eaten at convenience stores associated with the y-axis, and their weight is associated with their location on the x-axis for fraction, and y-axis as weight. So a given individual here will evolve over time as their weight evolves and their choice of where to eat evolves. But broadly speaking, we see a somewhat upward sloping line. What is this line telling us as an association here? Anyone want to summarize? What sort of relationship at a high level do we see from this model about the relationship between meals eaten at convenience stores versus weight? Yeah, so if those individuals are eating a larger fraction of their meals at convenience store, tend to have a somewhat higher weight, okay? That's an association that is being generated by the model. And in the language sometimes used by statisticians, we have articulated, ladies and gentlemen, a data generating process here. we've characterized a set of processes by which the model evolves over time at an individual level and indeed at the level of the broader population. And we have asked the model to simulate that and thereby produced set of observations over time that exhibit certain associations. Okay? So let's drag up a little bit more, and we'll see another association. So here is an association between grocery store distance, so the distance to the nearest grocery store on the one hand, shown in the x-axis, and here on the weight on the y-axis. And you'll notice there's more points here. Each point here is actually not an individual, it's not a specific individual, it's actually an observation that's occurring over time. But here we see, so each individual is sampled at several points in time. Here we see, again, an association between distance to the nearest grocery store and weight, as depicted by sort of a band here. And the band is generally at a level, it tends to rise up over, as the distance to the grocery store rises, there's somewhat of a higher weight. Similarly, we can look at grocery store to convenience store distance ratio. How much closer am I to a convenience store compared to a grocery store on the one hand, and look at weight compared to that. Alternatively, we could look at associations related to preference for convenience store meals versus weight in kilograms, or park distance on the x-axis versus weight in kilograms. I did not put these into the model as assumptions. I did not tell the model to accord with these. Rather, these are summaries coming out of the model, of the state of the model emerging from these sort of processes we did articulate, these processes here, associated with the population evolution. So I characterized to the model a certain set of assumptions about how people change over time. What affects a person's weight? What affects a person's choice of whether to go to a supermarket or convenience store based on preferences and distance? I articulated a set of rules regarding how they choose to eat their foods and how often they go food seeking, and to go engaging in food procurement. And from that emerged a collective dynamics for the model as a whole, whereby certain associations could be noted in observed variables from this model. Okay? So in this model, there were certain data put into it as far as assumptions concerning preferences or assumptions about where people lived, where food stores were located, and convenience stores and supermarkets. Some of that data was put into the model. Some of the data emerged from the model as observations, synthetic observations in this model, and can be compared with comparable data collected by empirical studies in the external world. We might cross-check the model's predictions against those studies, or we might go and try, in fact, to adjust certain model assumptions so that it most closely matches empirical data in the world that's been observed. More than that, we might use some of that data from the world to cross-validate the model, to, in other words, test the model's predictive abilities against this data from the world in a way that might allow us to reject or accept this model. But a model like this goes beyond simply characterizing the way things are in the world. Because within this model, one of the key uses of the simulation is often to ask questions about counterfactual situations. Situations that have not been encountered before, where we have not had the opportunity to collect data because we've never been in that situation before. And we want to use the model's depiction of how things might be governed in the world, to use its depiction of kind of our hypothesized set of processes in the world, to ask, well, how would the situation be different, for example, if we were to have a greater density of supermarkets, for example? if we were to place supermarkets in additional areas, if we were to eliminate food deserts within a city, if we were to have more parks and green space, if we were to place a surcharge on food as it's sold from convenience stores that is sugar rich, if we were to lower availability of fizzies, how would that end up rippling through to weight change? How would it end up rippling through to health outcomes at a more distal level? A model like this can be used to ask those counterfactual questions once one has some confidence that it captures the basic features of the current situation. It can be used to ask about how would things be different in a way that was difficult to do with empirical data because we've never seen that situation, okay? So often models will be used to test intervention strategies and to then compare the model against what actually plays out in an observed intervention to test its predictive capability. So a model like this is a breathing, living instrument when used right. It's not an instrument on which we place faith. It's not an instrument on which we use as a crystal ball. It's rather a tool to help us learn more quickly. Let me emphasize that point. It's a very important point that's often misunderstood. There's a certain community out there that would have you look at simulation models like this as a prediction tool, a tool that, you owe it your faith at a certain point to trust its predictions. And it may be that you can secure some benefits from models once you've built up a certain degree of confidence that we can use them to guide our actions in a way that's more confident. But I think the most useful component of these models is to serve as a learning tool. A tool that will help us spot inconsistencies between what we think might be operating out there in the world, how we think the world might be governed, between how we think the world might be changing, the rules by which it might be changing, the processes in the world, how we think they might be configured on the one hand, and we want to test the consistency of that theorizing with empirical evidence. And without the ability to link up, to simulate the model, to take our theories out of our heads, put them in an operational form, and ask what's the collective implication for associations like this, it's hard for us to test that theory. It's hard for us to evaluate, is that theory consistent with empirical evidence or not? If we can take that theory, put it in an operationalizable way, run it, and ask, does this match the patterns we see in empirical data? It more quickly allows us to identify flaws in our thinking. It allows us to identify shortcomings in our understanding. It allows us to identify areas where we must be falling flat in terms of characterizing how the world operates, and points us to avenues where we need to have better data or better, more granular depiction of some of the processes. So a model like this is a way to basically identify more quickly inconsistencies between what we think might be the case in the world and what actually is, by allowing us to understand the logical consequences of our theories for what they would imply about observables in the world. Okay? It provides us a way to take the theorizing out of our head, to put it in a way it can be shared with others, critiqued by comparison against empirical evidence, and refined collectively, rather than simply arguing back and forth based on limited understanding of what other people's theorizing posits. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is one model, and it's not a privileged model. It's a model we built in a boot camp in Melbourne, and it's the type of model we'll build up in this boot camp, okay? But it's a model that points to these general features we look to for models. A characterization of underlying processes by which the health of a population evolves, processes that evolve endogenously within a person, yes, but also due to exposure with environments, such as the distance to grocery stores or convenience stores. It allows us to put in characteristics of the world, put in data that describe particular contexts, such as Melbourne. It allows us to then run that model and compare the implications logically of what we've depicted with empirical evidence, and to, by running it over time, see the consequences in terms of health outcomes, in terms of costs, in terms of other factors over time. So a first model, a glimpse of where we're going, yes, a buzzing, blooming confusion, okay? So I know there's hundreds of questions that are probably percolating in your heads in this room, but we're gonna come back. Rest assured, we'll be going into diving down how we build these models, where the assumptions are in place. But I want to now switch over to a set of conceptual topics which will build on this this understanding, this sort of a brief exposure, and try to clarify certain points about it. Any questions up front about this? Yes.
You said that you can use the model to, if you look at the model and you think that the data generated by the model is different from empirical data, then you can adjust assumptions.
Yes.
But how do you know which assumptions to adjust? Because usually you can have multiple assumptions.
Yep. Yep. And that is a beautiful segue to why I think this boot camp is such an exciting occasion. Because I'll make 2 or 3 comments on this right now, okay? Number one, the way in which we systematically identify cases where in the model are we falling short. It requires a type of experimentation that is systematic and that is actually a comparatively rare art, but it's one where our lab actually specializes in. And it really comes out in what's known as the calibration process, okay? Calibration is a word with loaded implications. Different areas of the simulation space will use different words. And the word calibration is almost a dirty word because people think it means fudge factor. In other areas, they use the term parameter estimation or automated parameter estimation for it. And it sounds like you turn the crank and you arrive at a particular value for parameters and you go forward and use that. For me, calibration is a learning process. And it's a learning process when we study by looking at model outputs and intermediate components of model expectations, and sort of the data being produced by the model. We compare them with other evidence from the empirical world, typically not just one data point, but typically data points at several different sorts. And we study when the model is off, not just we try to minimize it in some optimization sense, but we try to understand why is it off? What is the fundamental tension in the model? Why it can't do a better job matching this data point, for example, without being a worse match for this other data point. And this is our chance to understand basically what is implied by our description in the model at a more detailed level in terms of emergent behavior, in terms of the behavior over time. And often what we do is we make use of several data points. If we have recourse to it, data points along several different processes, several different, that's great, thanks. Oh, God.
Oh.
Okay.
Sorry.
The cone of silence, that's great. So, ladies and gentlemen, we will often be comparing the model against several different data points at the same time. And we may find that it can be consistent with these, but not these others. And we use that to trace back to essentially which processes are off. But which processes in the model, which particular causal pathways are causing the issue, okay? And what this benefits from especially, though, is having data of different sorts from the world to which it can be compared, okay? If a whole area of the model is a question mark based on empirical data from the world, it makes it hard to figure out where within that is the model off. On the other hand, if you have points regarding several different areas of the model to go on, often you can use the calibration in ways we'll be discussing in a few days to sort of zero in on which particular aspects of the model's representation are off base, are causing the trouble, okay? And that allows you to then go and either plan further data collection or go further try different model representations. For example, splitting what you've posited as one state into two states, or going and assuming that we need to, maybe we need to add in an assumption that someone who's latently infected with TB in fact can be reinfected with TB during the latent period with a different strain. And basically we end up experimenting with the model with different assumptions to see if it better accords with that data. And the denser the data can be, the more data points that we can have for the baseline case, the better in allowing us to zero in on particular pathways. And that is going to be the subject for some of this afternoon's discussion, okay? And this is why this confluence of data science and system science that we are actively trying to promote is so important, because it allows us to take models to a level of learning, of ability to leverage learning that they have not previously enjoyed, okay? So we're going to see why data science and system science are such natural complements to each other, and why data science is going to allow us to learn much more quickly and deeply from our models, okay? But it's going to be a big subject also in the calibration context for zeroing in on what's wrong and why we see these problems between what the model expects and what we see from the empirical data. Okay? Other questions? Question? No? Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to now stop this recording, and I will go and